Good evening to all. Today's speaker is Professor Dr. Sam P. D. Matthew. He teaches in United Theological College, Bengaluru, authored 2 books and edited few books. He is a theological educator for more than 3 decades. The main area of interest, contextual biblical interpretation. He is from Madhya Kerala Diocese. He is married to Mariam Abraham, son Tefi Sam. A warm welcome to the speaker and to all the participants. Over to Dr. Sam P. Matthew.
Yeah, what I plan to do is to give you a gist of 2 Bible studies done from the perspective of eco-justice or eco-justice reading. And in this time, I think we have almost an hour left. Is that right, sir?
Yes.
Up to 9:30, no?
9:45, up to 9:45.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's what I plan to do is actually 30 minutes. I would like to present a gist of it for the first one, and then 15 minutes of discussion, and then the second one will be presented in 30 minutes or even less than that, and then another 15 minutes of discussion. So altogether, it would be 1.5 hours, and it might go to 9:45. And I hope that we will have an interactive session, and not simply me speaking from here, because I believe that you are all experienced people, and you have all gone through the 2 texts that are sent, very interesting text on Mark's Gospel. So I take it for granted that you have already read. I think if you haven't read, you may not understand much of it. But if you have read it, I think then we can enter into a meaningful discussion. Is that okay, sir?
Okay.
All right. Yeah. Now, let me share the screen with you. In the screen, I have actually made a gist of the study that is done. The first, I hope you can all see the screen.
Yes.
All right. That is the first study is done by William Lauder, an Australian professor of New Testament, who has done on Mark 1 to 15, Good News for the Earth, Reflections on Mark 1 to 15. That's the title, as you all know. Now, this study is done from an earth perspective, avoiding colonizing texts committed to earth spirituality. It values the whole creation and not just humans. It tries to hear the text when it coheres with author's own values and when it goes against his values. That means, see, it is trying to read from the perspective of the earth, whether the text agrees or accord with the author's values or not, and it needs a hermeneutics of suspicion and openness. I think you may have already gone through those hermeneutical principles that are needed for ecological reading. We will come to that in a short while. And this text invites us to listen to the world of the text, where we hear voices and guess our way through interconnectedness that gave John and Jesus a place in the wilderness. Now, Mark 1 to 15, which is actually the beginning section of Mark's Gospel, called as the prologue or overture to the Gospel. And in that, we hear melodies of later chapters, and the scene is set for what follows. And Mark 1, 14 to 15, which is actually the kernel of that passage, belongs. I request all the participants to turn off the speaker, the audio. Yeah, thank you. 14 and 15 belongs to what follows and what precedes. It recapitulates the themes of the first verse, that is verse 1:1. It says, beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And in 1:14, Jesus is preaching the good news. So what is announced, what is declared in the beginning, 1:1, is actually elaborated in 1:14 and 15. In this way, good news both embraces the prologue and serves as a title for the account that follows. So Jesus brings both the good news and Jesus is the good news. So there are two aspects of this good news. We will see that in Mark's gospel also. Here in Mark, the good news is to be found in the events that follow, the events that Mark had begun to tell in Mark 1:1. In Mark 1:1, there are echoes of Isaianic text, Isaiah 52:7 and 62:1, which speaks of the messenger of good news and of the one anointed to tell the good news to God's people. Now, these had become text of hope for the Jews who were under foreign domination for many centuries, as you know, from 586 BC. And others hear the echoes of imperial proclamation that declare Rome's imperial power was the good news for the world, bringing peace and stability. See, that is what actually the Roman emperors claimed, that they will bring peace, stability, and prosperity. So they were considered as the harbingers of good news. So in that context, Mark tells us that Jesus is the one who brings good news. So the good news overture includes many voices, as we find in the gospel in 1:3, the voice of one crying out in the wilderness. We will look at that in detail later on. The voice of those confessing their sins in baptism in 1:5, when John baptized, and the voice from heaven, 1:11, at the time of Jesus' baptism, and the voice of Jesus himself, that is Jesus preaching, that is recorded in verses 14 and 15. Now, this article pursues the questions. Now, this is to be focused. What about the voice of the earth? See, it has many, it speaks about many voices explicitly, but can we hear the voice of the earth? That is the question the author is asking. And what about the good news? Is it good news for the earth? So has this good news anything to do with the earth and its components? So this is the question that is pursued all through this article. It's not very difficult to understand if you read it carefully. Now, first, the author talks about the road making. The three texts from the Hebrew scriptures combine to declare that John the Baptist would make a straight road or straight path. These are Exodus 23, Malachi 3:1, and Isaiah 43. The image of the road in Mark is not violent, as in Luke 3:4-6, which speaks of filling every valley and mountain leveled. That's actually a violent image, but that is not found in Mark. Here, road is not in the wilderness, and the focus is not on road making, but making out the path or ensuring it as a way that can be traveled. Mark will later picture Jesus on the road that will lead to the cross. So the focus of the image of the way is the readiness and access. Get ready for the one who is coming, that is Jesus Christ. So the rest of the Gospel of Mark, the image of the way describes Jesus' ministry, his journey, and especially to Jerusalem and the temple, as we find in these texts, beginning in Caesarea Philippi, a symbol of Gentile world, and climaxing in the temple. So for Mark, then, the way means more than a way of being in the world than a way out of it. So Mark is not suggesting the way is taking us out of the world, but actually it's a way of being in the world, one that entered into solidarity with people along the way and embodied their suffering, a way of inclusiveness. That is the way that Jesus preached. Now, the second thing that he discusses is about the wilderness and hope that is mentioned in the text, especially Mark 1:3-4 and verse 12 and verse 13. Wilderness is a central theme running through the prologue, this Mark 1:14-15 and 1-15. Mark 1:2, we find two quotations, one from Exodus 23 and Malachi 3, as it was mentioned. The Exodus passage links us to wilderness because in the wilderness theme is actually an important theme in the Old Testament. Wilderness was a way of escape for Israel from Pharaoh's Egypt, the bondage of Egypt and the oppression of the Egyptians, and contains the promise, I will send an angel in front of you to guard you on the way and bring you to the place I have prepared for you, which is again echoed in Malachi. Thus, the opening verses in Mark 1-3 already creates a word of association linked with Israel's hope and wilderness. So, wilderness is associated with hope. That's a point that is underlined. Wilderness was therefore a favorite place of expectations and preparations for new acts of liberation that echoed those of old. Josephus reports several such acts of individuals and movements that made wilderness their base. Wilderness was a place of hope in transition. Some expected a repeat of great miracles of the wilderness period of Israel's history. That is, the miraculous feedings, the river crossing, the military formation, and revelations about the Torah. All this is explained in the text. John starts the work of preparation in the wilderness, and Jesus undergoes his testing in the wilderness, where he began to preach the good news. But the question this article pursues is that, is wilderness more than the vestibule of hope? Is there anything more than this hope that is portrayed in the Old Testament regarding wilderness? Now, wilderness and lifestyle. I think this is actually one of the central points of the author. Wilderness has a character, and to some extent, it is very ambiguous in some respects. Though it is wilderness, the river Jordan passes through the foot of the wilderness. That is the ambiguity. Another ambiguity is John's nourishment. Though it is wilderness, John the Baptist is nourished in the wilderness. And according to 130, the angels nourished Jesus in the wilderness also. So it's a place of nourishment. It's a place from the Jordan actually begins to flow. There is a romantic appeal in going to the wilderness. But beside this is the serious question of whether the globalized values of the city dwellers are not only marginalizing the rural people, but also threatening the planet Earth and its inhabitants. When someone deliberately returned to the wilderness to leave off the land, that was a challenge to the lifestyle chosen by others. Now, this is an important point to be noted. John's behavior was a call to repentance, and it was a challenge to the lifestyle that is followed by others. That is John's lifestyle of nourishment, being nourished in the wilderness through the wild honey and locusts. That is how he led his lifestyle, and wearing a leather girdle around his waist and so on. Now, the next point he discusses is trust in the land. Jesus did not remain in the wilderness like John, but carried the wilderness values into his ministry. No, Jesus was not like John in this respect, but the gospel traditions testify that Jesus called for the same repentance as John. The message of John the Baptist and Jesus was the same, that is repentance and forgiveness. He carried the confrontation into the settled areas of Galilee and its surrounds by living the lifestyle he followed and invited others to share his lifestyle. So the lifestyle that Jesus followed was something that was very similar to the lifestyle of John the Baptist. That's why the author says Jesus took the wilderness into the towns and villages, unlike John the Baptist. He carried they were to live off a bare minimum, traveling from town to town, depending on the network of hospitality and caring that the good news advocated. So this is the mission practice of Jesus also. Jesus asked them to take only the minimum things for the mission, according to Mark 6:7 following. By calling many to abandon wealth, that's actually an important teaching of Jesus. Land and family, Jesus was subverting the traditional values and calling for a radical reassessment of priorities, inviting a new relationship to land and to people. So I think it needs a lot of time to explain it, but we can discuss if you want more clarity, time permits. So one's relationship to land actually is a central focus in all this. Is Jesus' attitude to wealth, land, and also the family relationships. He called people to look at the lilies of the field. Of course, in Matthew's Gospel, we find that Matthew 6:25 following, and the ravens and the grass, and then ask people to trust God. It was a challenge to the anxiety that hoards and frets, and as a consequence, exploits and often destroys. It assumes the possibility of coexistence with earth. So the lifestyle advocated by Jesus was a protest against values as the prevailing values, the existing values as the cynic and stoic preachers, these wandering preachers and philosophers advocated. So that was something similar to that, although not exactly the same. The alternative, preached by Jesus, asserted that the good life involved living in harmony with God. Such an alternative was informed by prophetic vision of the reign of God. The next thing that he discusses is the baptismal experience that is recorded in this passage. That is the rent heaven, voices from and of heavens. The tearing apart of the heavens is in the baptism of Jesus could indicate open access to the divine, and at the same time, it's a celebration of removed barriers. By the divine fiat, heaven springs a leak, and the earth is to be filled with the divine glory. The urgency makes open the way for the Spirit. Pictured here, not as a gushing wind or as a mighty storm, as in the Old Testament, or burning flame also, but as a gentle dove. That's again a point that is emphasized here in this article. In this event, the heaven and earth touch. Though the focus is primarily on God and humanity, the event engages heaven and earth in a way that probably goes beyond symbolism. There is now hope that God's goodness will fill the creation as Jesus would baptize with the Spirit and bind the strong man of the demonic world, according to Mark 3:27. Now, as I mentioned, dove is again another point that is focused here. For Mark, dove is just an image that evokes many a course. Some hear the story of Spirit hovering over the waters of creation in Genesis creation story. We find that. Others find the language of foreign deities baptized to serve better purposes. Still others recall the great flood and the good news of a new beginning for Noah after the flood, not only for himself, but also for the all of life. For Mark, the Spirit becomes the source of power for Jesus' victorious battle against the forces of evil. And John said that Jesus is to baptize with the Spirit. So in the baptism of Jesus, the identity is affirmed. The 2 points are affirmed in the baptism. That is, Jesus is affirmed as God's servant, echoing Isaiah 42:1. And also he is affirmed as the royal Messiah, the Son of God, echoing Psalm 2:7. Now, the animals and angels, the voices in and of the struggle, is at another point that is brought out in this ecological reading from an earth perspective. Mark 1:30 says that Jesus was with the wild animals, and Mark pictures Jesus as being in a new paradise, as a new Adam, tempted but remaining true, living at one with the animals, and who therefore posed no threat. The animals were not a threat to Jesus. Such a view enhances the sense of future ideal as one of coexistence with the earth and its creatures, as we find in Isaiah 11. It's actually an important passage. Isaiah 11 talks about the lion and the lamb will lie together, and the child will play with the serpent. The harmony in nature. There is no enmity between human beings and nature or the animals. So the image of the dove might contribute to the thought of a new paradise after the flood. Perhaps Mark may mean the scene to resemble paradise, a foretaste of restored order, as it is prophesied in Isaiah 11. Animals are present peaceably as once they were in the Garden of Eden. See, in the Garden of Eden also, the Adam and Eve, the first human beings, coexisted with all the creatures very peacefully. The struggle was only with Satan, as in the case of the Garden of Eden, so also here in the wilderness. Jesus tames the animals and resists Satan. The testament of the 12 patriarchs, which is actually an intertestament literature, promise such power to people of Israel in direct association with the devils and the angels, and that is quoted here. Another point is the earth and struggle. Normally, wilderness was a place to avoid in Jesus' time, as is the case now also. But here, earth articulates the fragility of life. Human beings shrivel in size, lost in the greater than human wind and heat and wasteland, which is the characteristic mark of the wilderness. But here, the boundary of human confidence and competence, but also the locus of revelation. So the wilderness becomes the locus of revelation. The wilderness is experienced as a raw terrain of the soul, not simply as a metaphor for personal inwardness, but as an earth colloquium of existence. That is a terminology that is used. That means it indicates the earth as a place where it dances to the rhythms and does not answer our questions. So when we go to the wilderness, we have to actually go with the rhythm that is found in the wilderness. That is the rhythm of the earth, the wind and the storm and whatever is there and the heat. For Jesus to face the wilderness is another way of saying Jesus faced reality. He faces exposure and struggle to overcome and overcome the challenges that he experienced. For people in Mark's world, wilderness was a numinous place of confrontation of good and evil, a place of demons and of angels, of destruction and new life. For Jesus also, it was a place of destruction and new life. Jesus' retreat into wilderness was not a journey from the struggle, but it was a raw conflict and raw earthness in the tone of the struggle. That means a struggle that is actually focused on the earth. Jesus is able to see God's issues as well as earth's issues. He is able to be the good news to those severed from their connection to the land by exploitative landlords and the leeching occupation of the Romans and their henchmen. It is likely that the wilderness disturbed, whined, shouted, and wailed, giving voice to the pain of the struggle as he experienced the Gethsemane later on in the passion of Christ. Before his death, bored in darkness and overwhelmed with grief and struggle with evil. Now, this ecological reading also should pay attention to the collateral damage. The author says Mark cannot be idolized. Actually, we cannot say that everything is okay in Mark's gospel with regard to ecological reading. There are certain problems, and the author mentions that also. The part of the victory of the Son of God over demons in Mark's gospel also includes acts that impinge negatively on earth and have produced patterns of thought and behavior that are destructive. See, for instance, in the healing of the Gadarene demoniac, Mark 5:1-20, we find a herd of pigs, about 2,000 of them, drowned. When the demons went into the pigs, actually they had to go to the sea and to be drowned. Actually, so this creates a problem. So actually, William Loader calls it the collateral damage. The miracles. What is? It's a military terminology. Collateral damage. Actually, that is when you are hitting the enemy. Some innocent people, civilians also may be killed. Something like that. So the miracles and the natural processes is at another point that is discussed. In a similar way, Jesus calming the storm, that is Mark 4:31-35 following, and also walking on water, Mark 6, and food multiplication, that is Mark 6:35, all subordinate the natural processes to the manipulation for that benefits the humans. The approach is actually symptomatic of a worldview that can disregard natural process. See, if you look at the natural process in all these, walking on water or multiplication of the loaves or the calming of the sea, there is, Jesus actually acts against the natural processes. So if you press it, actually that creates certain problems. So however, such scenes are alive with echoes of the past. So what is intended is not interference in the natural processes. That means or whether it is multiplication of the storm or the defeating the gravity by walking on water or the calming the storm. Now here, the author says that the sea miracles recall the Exodus experience, both as a departure and crossing the river Jordan. Food miracles recall both the Exodus and the wonders performed by Elijah and Elisha. So the point of such stories is that the hearer should recognize divine power at work, and these powers are those of Yahweh. See, that is the point to be underlined. They are not inaugurating a new order or new possibilities of relating to the natural world, giving us clues to control the weather patterns and multiply scarce resources. Now, healing for creation, that is the last point that is discussed in this article. Some aspects of good news in Mark do entail positive changes that involve healing for creation. This is apparent in exorcisms. Throughout Jesus' ministry, he baptizes the world with the Spirit. Human beings are released from demonic distortions, and people are healed, paralyzed, are set free. Behind these acts is the notion that good news means bringing back into order, good order, one of the meanings of righteousness or justice. So the last point that is mentioned, a call to change, a vision for renewal. So the fundamental value of the passage is change or metanoia. That is the word. I would translate it as complete, a total transformation, a change of attitude, which is the basic meaning of the word repentance. Repentance is actually a poor translation. A message both John and Jesus share when it goes with it goes the grace of forgiveness. John encourages his readers to celebrate change, that is this complete transformation, and forgiveness with a sacramental encounter with earth, through earth's waters, through the baptism. So the author connects actually this repentance and forgiveness with the baptismal experience of Jesus. There are multiple allusions here to the day of creation, to Noah and flood, to the Exodus. There is also a fundamental acknowledgement that human works fail, and that truth will emerge when in our bodiliness we find a way of allowing the earth to speak to us and for us. So the new in Jesus builds on John the Baptist's future vision, but emphasizes a new age when God will rule the earth. It's a future hope informed by prophetic visions of inclusiveness, of feasting and community. This is the good news of Jesus Christ and about him. So solidarity in the creation of renewal is the next point that is related to that. Mark's groaning of the Spirit and yearning for total renewal is heard in the groaning for escape in Gethsemane, crying the cry of forsakenness from the cross, not a triumphalistic symphony. Instead, Jesus treads the way of change and transformation, a way that would see him wounded and dying at the end, presenting a model to inspire others to take the same journey. To tread that path, Jesus invites us not to rush through the countryside to be in time for a heavenly parking space, but to live in solidarity with the Spirit, with all creation. That's a beautiful sentence that the author has. This is the way of vulnerability and compassion, not of happy peace of mind and ethereal victory. That exposure celebrated in the waters of baptism, and connects us to the vulnerability of the earth and the ultimate vulnerability of God. That is the gist of this article by William Loader. Now, I invite your questions before I or clarifications, if any, based on this article, or any other questions that emerge from these points. Yes, please raise your hands and then raise your questions. Yes, yeah, Satyananda, yeah, please go ahead.
Sir, good evening, sir. Hello, good evening, sir.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, good evening.
Sure. Sir, is a place of wilderness is a place of curse or anything else, sir?
See, I think that's an interesting question. Actually, that was the popular perception. The wilderness is actually a useless place. That is in our time also the same thing. No, all those desert lands, wasteland is considered as useless places. And in nowadays multinational companies take over and then build up and so on. I think that is not, actually the article is speaking against that. Wilderness is actually presented as a place of revelation, where of course there are evil forces at work there, but wilderness is part of God's creation, and there are many good things, as the author himself mentioned. Actually, the Jordan actually flows from there, and it's also a place of nourishment. It's a place of revelation, and it has got very interesting connections with the Old Testament also. So wilderness is not a place of curse according to the biblical tradition, but you are right in popular perception then and now. And that's a good question. Thank you.
Yeah, sir.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, Jesus went to there to reveal on his vision that place or anything else. Wilderness.
Your question is why Jesus went to the wilderness?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think see the wilderness experience is very important for Jesus, because that was a time of preparation for Jesus' ministry. If you read the other gospels, I think this becomes a little more clear what happened in the time of temptation. Actually, it's not a time of temptation. It's not proper to say temptation, but it's proper to say it's a time of testing, where Jesus was actually, wrestling with how he should go about in his mission and so on. So it's a place of solitude, it's a place of prayer, and according to Matthew and Luke, it was a place of fasting. But more importantly, Jesus actually confronted the powers of the evil and Satan there in the wilderness. Of course, that is not because of the earth or the wilderness, but because he was actually having his solitude, Satan appeared there. So I think the purpose of Jesus going, in my understanding, it is actually the preparation for Jesus' ministry, where Jesus had to come out with strong resolve, because the temptations, the wilderness experience actually starts after the baptism. It's important to understand that. And what has happened in the baptism, as the author also mentions, that Jesus is confirmed as the Messiah, as the Son of God, and Jesus is endowed with the Spirit. So then the next question is that how to go about in mission, no? So whether it should be shortcut, it should be way of suffering, it should be appeasing the powers, all these are mentioned in more detail in Matthew and Luke. Let's not go into that, because that takes us away from the topic ecological reading. All right, yeah. But that's also a related question. Yeah, others, please, yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Jesus went to the wilderness to study the rhythm of nature. In order to face the world, we have to study the rhythm of nature. So wilderness is not a desert, but it is some trees and plants were there. So Jesus went there to study the rhythm of nature. Can we interpret like that?
Yeah, that could be done. There are certain hints, but not explicit actually. See, Jesus, when we study the Gospels, actually, if you take only the Mark's Gospel, that is okay. The rhythm of the nature, and then Jesus wanted to know how to go about with the wild animals and so on. No? As the author says, he tamed. But I think it is much more than the rhythm of nature. But from an ecological perspective, that is also there. But I think if we talk about the rhythm of nature, I think what Jesus took from nature, as the author says, I think he puts it beautifully. He took the wilderness experience to the towns and villages. That is the wilderness lifestyle. I think that he learned how to survive yourself from the earth, without harming others, without damaging the earth and its resources and its components. I think, yeah, there in that way, I think I can agree with that. Probably the other things also we can read into that. But of course, the lifestyle that he learned from John the Baptist and in the wilderness, I think that's a very serious thing. Correct, yeah. Yes, thank you. Others, please. Yes, go ahead, actually. I still have 45 minutes. Yeah, I will wait for another 5 more minutes because this is actually, I think this is an article that is more easier to understand. So I think but the other article is little, little tedious. So I thought you would have more questions here because it's easy to follow, much more easier. Yes, I can still wait for 5 more minutes. Yes, please. Satyananda, you can put your hand down.
Sir,
Yes, yeah, Gideon, yeah, Reverend Gideon, yeah, please go ahead, yeah.
yes, sir. Sir, in this Mark Gospel, particularly mentioned Jesus with animals.
Yes.
Is there any specification, sir? Why
Yeah, the article, the
animals
article,
and connected with the animals, the desert place, no, the animals, there is no water.
yeah, the article clearly mentions that actually. I think perhaps you may have to read the article once again. It's very clearly said Jesus was with the wild animals actually. Actually, it is not wild animals, but non-domestic animals were there. So I think that's what we find. The other day I was seeing I think it came in the Madhubhumi news bulletin, which I saw in the e-news. Baba Amte's son, Prakash Amte, and his children are actually living with wild animals. There in Resort Anandavana. Baba Amte, who worked with the leprosy patients and then, started a mission. So there are people living with wild animals even in our midst. Actually, we can go and see, live with leopards, with porcupines and all those. With wild animals whom we don't even dare to go near. They are simply living with them. So living with non-domestic animals is possible, but the thing is, the human beings have actually lost the relationship with the animals in the forest. And so enmity is created. So any human being, the animal is scared. So Baba Amte and his children, I think they have changed their attitude towards the animals, and the animals also changed their attitude. And so therefore, I think Jesus, that is one very special thing that Mark mentions. Jesus lived with the wild animals. They did not harm him. And the author says Jesus tamed. But I think that's little too much. Even taming is something that is not natural again. Wild animals are not to be tamed, actually. No, it is just as we don't like to be tamed by anyone. So animals also would not like to be tamed, but we need to coexist with animals in peace and harmony. Yeah, any other question? Anything else? Yeah, I think our time is running out. Yeah, I think that it's a good question because it takes us back to Isaiah 11. Isaiah 11 also speaks about the harmony in nature, in the future vision of the kingdom of God by Isaiah. In future, you know what?
61.
Yes, Isaiah 65 also, Isaiah 11, Isaiah chapter 11. I think you should read. Anybody interested in ecological reading should read Isaiah 11 very carefully.
Yes.
And the more important verse there, the lion will eat grass. And usually my question to the students is actually, what will you eat then? Okay, that's a good question for those who are pursuing ecological reading, actually. If the lion will eat grass in the kingdom, and the kingdom of is already a reality in our midst, then what will you eat and what are we eating? It's an important question. Okay, that's a food for thought anyhow. Yeah, I think we need to proceed further. Is there any pressing question regarding the first question? First one, first we can ask the questions later on also. Towards the end. So if you still have questions, please raise. Yeah, let me go to the next article and let me try to present the gist of it. Oh, this is the same article, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, this is, can you see? Can you all see the screen? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. All right. So this is actually an article by Kate D. Dyer. When is the end not the end? The fate of the earth in biblical eschatology. This is actually an ecological reading of Mark 13, which is called the Markan Apocalypse, or the Markan presentation of what will happen in the end. Especially talks about cosmic eschatology. What will happen to the cosmos, to the sun, the earth, the stars, and so on. Now, we need to put very close attention to it because then only we will be able to understand this article, because it's more critical than the first article. The Genesis mandate, that is what we find in Genesis 1:28, subdue and to have dominion over the creation, that is the normal interpretation. It has been, I think you may have already dealt with that, I suppose, in the Old Testament classes. This has been interpreted as giving human dominion over the creation, and is often seen as a cause of exploitation and abuse of the environment. So this article is actually going against such kind of interpretations, and then try to understand the biblical eschatology in Mark 14 from an ecological perspective. So this paper aims to retrieve some of these texts of cosmic terror. That means it presents these texts presents themselves as terror texts as far as the earth, the sun, and the moon and the stars are concerned. Terror texts from the grip of both fanatical and scholarly apocalypticism, to evaluate them in the light of Earth Bible principles and to wrestle with those texts that seem to persist as against Earth. So the focus will be on the synoptic gospel apocalyptic text, and Mark 13 in particular. It dwells on the topic, the fate of the earth in biblical eschatology. Because biblical eschatology presents a very fearful, a very terrorful fate of the earth. The earth and the stars will fall off, will get darkened, and then will get destroyed in the end. That is the topic here. How do you understand it ecologically? Three major Earth Bible principles used in the ecological reading are utilized here as foundation for interpretation. I think you know the 6 Earth Bible principles, eco-justice principles that are applied. Out of that 6, Three are utilized here. That is the principle of interconnectedness. That is, the earth is a community of interconnected living things and that are mutually dependent on each other for life and survival. And second, intrinsic worth of the universe and earth. And the third, the principle of purpose and of the universe, the earth and its components. So the paper suggests alternate interpretations to the obsession with the eschatology of inevitable disaster that dominates so much of popular theology and not only popular theology, but also popular understanding, and even in the secular world. Now, he actually this paper discusses this topic under five headings. So, first one is fate of the earth in popular eschatology, or the eschatology of inevitable disaster. The author actually puts it under six biblicist eschatological principles, as opposed to the six eco-justice principles, which he thinks that it is the fundamental Christian version of six eco-justice principles, especially among the fanatical, fundamental, conservative Christians. First is the principle of imminent cataclysm. That is, the earth is headed for disaster sooner rather than later. Everything is coming to an end. Earth will be destroyed, the sun will be destroyed, the stars, everything will come to an end soon. Second, the principle of disconnectedness. We humans don't have to share or feel responsible for Earth's fate. Salvation is for humans and not for the earth. So salvation is understood only in anthropocentric manner, only for humans, not for earth. So the third one is the principle of inevitability. There is nothing we can do or the earth can do about it. What will happen will happen. No, only God can do something. That is some kind of fatalistic, the karma theory is also there. Number four, the principle of transcendence. What really matters is the next world, what Norman Habel calls it heavenism. That means what happens is the heaven. These are actually the soul theory also goes with that. What happens, what is more important is the soul, not matter, not the earth, and not our environment. So everything is only on transcendent things, only on God and transcendent things we need to concentrate. Number five, the principle of sovereignty. God is in ultimate control of all this, even direct control. So God is in control. You don't have to do anything. You simply need to relax yourself, trusting in God. That's all. The sixth one is the principle of self-interest. God will rapture believers out of this mess in the nick of time. I will be saved. I have got passport to heaven. I have the visa. I will escape. Let anything happen to this earth, the sun and the moon and the stars. I don't bother. The consequence of such an attitude of theology is actually very severe. Every ecological disaster and every sign of degenerating human behavior is seen as proof that the end times are ended indeed upon us. This in turn tends to reinforce faith as a kind of grim paralysis, stoically enduring the decline of our planet in the hope of something better in the next life. That means, see, if you have such a theology in mind, then what has happened is that you don't do anything. We cannot do anything. Only God has to interfere. So that means the fate of the planet Earth is becoming worse and worse, and it is more degeneration. Any motivation to take action in support of a suffering humanity, let alone a suffering Earth, is limited to the immediate concern of caring for one's own and seeking revenge on those causing the catastrophes. That means, you cannot do anything. So what you can do is that you need to take care of yourself, and don't do anything else. Long-term policies to address environmental and social degradation are simply irrelevant. Things get worse before they can get better. This is again normal rhetoric that we hear. They will get better only through God's direct intervention. Norman Hamel says actually a very important statement. Such a perspective reduces the earth to a ball of corrupted matter about to be thrown on to the waste dump in eternity. So that means there is no ecological concern, environmental concern, because everything is coming to an end, going to end. What can you do? Only God can do something, so you don't do anything. So the situation gets worsened and worsened. That is the problem that we are facing. Biblical texts are used as the basis of such jaundiced view of the future of creation, such distorted view. The description of the sun being darkened and moon giving no light and the stars falling from heaven, that is actually a central passage in Mark 13, 24 and 25, are interpreted as indicating a pessimistic view of the future of the cosmos. For instance, see, there are some scholars, reputed scholars like Mary and Talbot also, goes with that view. The world in which Jesus and his followers live is actually, she says, bleak, ugly, and painful place filled with wars, persecutions, trials, betrayals, death, and yet to be experienced. The last bloodbath of cosmic dimensions. So Mark provides negative assessment of the human situation and the shocking solution to the problem. See, what is more shocking is the solution that is provided. Only direct intervention of God can preserve the elect from the mess this generation making on the cosmos. So that's what she says. So she also notes that such accusations has permitted this generation to keep increasing the mess for almost 2000 years. That means, see, God is anyhow, all these, our planet and the stars and the moon, sun, everything is going to be destroyed, everything is going to end soon. So what happens is that whatever happens to around us, we don't bother. The mess around us is increasing day after day. So there is a cognitive dissonance, that is, there is a conflict of values or belief systems here generated by this application of biblicist eschatological principles to our current social and environmental crisis. And this demands a re-examination of our exegetical presuppositions. That means, see, we want to save the environment on the one side, and on the other side, we want to believe what the text says explicitly. In literally, we want to take it as okay, God is going to destroy all of them. So how do you reconcile these conflicting values, conflicting beliefs, within the Christian circle? That's the question that is raised here. Even scholars like Mary Ann Talbot and Collins suggest that we should confront the worldview presupposed by the Gospel of Mark and expose its inadequacies for meeting today's problems. Now, it is very true that we need to confront the worldview that is presented here. But the author Dyer argues that the origin of the bleak apocalyptic outlook is not to be found in the earliest gospel and its setting. Now, this is an important point to be noted. He says this origin of this apocalyptic outlook, that is the drastic end of the planet Earth and the sun and the moon and the stars, is not found in the other earliest gospel, be it in Galilee, Syria, or Rome. Rather, its source should be traced to the heightened dualism of apocalypticism of the 19th or 20th century America, where we find a particular combination of modern Western science and fundamentalist biblicism. Now, this is a point actually he clearly explains. There is a combination of modern Western science and fundamentalist biblicism that comes to the interpretation of this passage in a biblicist manner. The language of the end used in the popular media today seems to be dominated by the combination of biblical concepts and modern science, producing a taxonomy of ultimate terror. For example, as a result, apocalypse, Armageddon, all these taken from the book of Revelation, have become two most important public biblical terms used in the secular vocabulary to indicate the language of the end. So it is that means this combination of biblical concepts, uncritical understanding of biblical concepts, and then certain modern science has come into secular vocabulary, and it has influenced our thinking, our interpretations, our worldview drastically. So the popular combination of modern science and uncritical biblical thought can lead to an eschatological myth so powerful that it can not only impel faith communities towards sectarian fantasies, what he calls apocalyptic lunatics. That's a very interesting term. That means people who are obsessed with the apocalyptic thought of especially the destruction and the drastic end of the earth, the sun and the moon and the stars, but also trap large number of Bible-believing Christians to inactivity by a worldview, or he calls it a world-denying view. So this is the result. This is actually what happens when you simply go along with this eschatological understanding, uncritical biblical understanding of apocalyptic view. The large number of Christians become inactive. That means what can I do? Anyhow, God is going to bring about all these. I cannot do anything. I don't want to do anything. That kind of attitude. So the power of such a myth rests upon a set of old positions that still have not been deconstructed. That is polarizing our understanding of spirit and matter, ethics and eschatology, ideal and real, politics and religion, this world and the other, the present and the future, the sacred and the secular. No? These polarities are created because of this. Many of these distinctions are made by appealing to apocalyptic. They are dangerous polarities, because inevitably they devalue the material in favor of spiritual. Now, this is again a big problem for many Christians. The material is devalued in favor of the spiritual. Earth in favor of heaven, the present and the future, distant future in favor of the imminent future. Dyer, that is the author, tries to retrieve some text from the distortion of this apocalyptic paradigm in order to resolve the tension between earth and eschatology. So there remains a huge problem for eco-theology in those texts that resist retrieval and advocate our earnestly desiring parousia, that is the second coming of the day of the Lord, through which heavens will be torched and dissolved. The problem is not the imagination of an end to the created order as such, but really, since Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler, the dethroning of Earth as center of the universe, that is the apple of God's eye. You know what has happened with the Copernican revolution and with Galileo and Kepler is that instead of the Earth-centered universe, now they advocated a heliocentric universe actually. So which has changed the status quo, the perspective and the worldview according to this author, which has influenced, of course, it has helped science in various ways, but it has not helped theology much. That's what he says. The problem lies in earnestly desiring such an end and seeing it as part of the Creator's immediate plan for the creation. As a good thing, that is the end of the world is a good thing. See, that is the understanding. That cannot happen soon enough. Such a conviction can only result in passive disinterest in the future of the environment at best. Now, the second point that he's discussed is challenging the distorting priorities of the apocalyptic paradigm. It must be noted that the John apocalyptic is a modern category that has been imposed retrospectively on ancient texts, most of which regard themselves as prophecies. Or the urgent words of God to their own generation. The label apocalypse was used to indicate the perceived heightening of transcendent language and symbolism in prophetic texts, though the distinction has never been an easy or obvious one, as Colin points out. The use of the word apocalypse can fulfill a useful descriptive function, of course, but it should not be used to impose a set of polarities arising out of high modernism onto the ancient text. The polarities are already mentioned of the spirit and matter, the present and the future, and so on. While these supposed dualities may indicate tensions in apocalyptic and prophetic literature, they have been polarized into binary opposites. by subsequent developments in our understanding of space, time, and cosmos. Dyer uses the relationship between heaven and earth, that is space, and between present and future to illustrate it. Now, regarding the heaven and earth, he mentions an interesting example of Yuri Gagarin, a Russian astronaut who went to the space first time in 1961. He went to the heaven or the space, outer space, and declared that there is no God. So, because he could not find God there, so the polarization between heaven and earth is already expressed through his words when he said, I could not find God here. So the increasing modern scientific awareness of the vast regions of space, coupled with a biblicist insistence that heaven is somewhere up there, have led to a spiritual duality quite foreign to the thought of prophetic world and apocalyptic literature. Rather, biblical and other early texts portray heaven and earth as interactive parallel universe. Now, this is a point to be underlined, where heavenly messengers and humans in dreams and visions may cross the boundaries and time zones on an everyday basis. So he, for instance, talks about the word that is used in both in angel, or which is translated as angel sometimes and messenger sometimes. In Greek, angelos, it can be translated as messenger or angel, depending upon the convenience of the translator. Now, the author actually says that, see, it's a heaven and earth are not simply separated, two separate universes, parallel universes existing, but they are interactive parallel universes. They interact and then they coexist. Biblical interpretations often lag behind when hermeneutical paradigm begin to shift. Because in Mark 1:2, we translate angelos as an angel. That as not as an angel, but as a messenger. But in Mark 16:7, the same word is used and we translate it as angel. That's an interesting thing. I think the author explains that. In the cosmic understanding of the first century Mediterranean world, there are intermediaries between heaven and earth that coexist on the inside of a sphere suspended over the abyss, mirroring each other as gods and human contact. In the 4th Ezra 7:49 also speaks of such a thing. Such an understanding of the interconnectedness of earth and heaven challenges the popular religious assumption about the ontological space between them, that the heaven is the opposite to and distant from earth and replaces earth after its demise. That is the popular understanding. Rather, heaven or the heavens interact with, mirror, and initiate activities on earth. These ideas also challenge our assumptions about heaven as the only abode of God. This is again another point. So heaven, of course, is God exists in heaven, but not only in heaven, but on earth also, and the whole created universe. So the third point is retrieving Mark 13:14-20 from the distorting polarities of the apocalyptic paradigm. This is actually a daunting task that the author does. The darkened sun and the moon and the falling stars in Mark 13 can be interpreted from a more historical, earth-based, and less apocalyptic, that is, transcendent perspective. So he says, from the earth perspective, away from the bright city lights, the stars can be seen falling every clear evening. From the perspective of ancient oral cultures, these heavenly movements are significant in understanding and interpreting events on earth. See, for example, the star in the east is followed by the wise men to locate the king of Jews, according to Matthew 2. The smoke of great battles darkens the sun and turns the moon red blood. And any other concurrently natural wonders are pressed into service as always, describing, interpreting, remembering, and dating significant human events, as in the case of Matthew 2, in the case of the wise men who looked at the star. Since Copernican revolution, we have burdened these texts with the full force of modern apocalyptic terror and insisted that Mark 13, 24 to 27 must be a parousia text, that is about the second coming of Christ, when the earth and the planets will be destroyed. That is the text of the end. However, pre-Copernican exegesis, that means when it was believed that the earth is the center, offered a different interpretation. For example, Jean Calvin interprets them as referring to the continual rising and falling that we observe in the world. Now, this is again a very interesting interpretation. That means before the Copernican revolution, that early interpretations actually talk about the falling of the stars as referring to the falling of the leaders. That is what is explained there. Mark 13:29 is usually translated as he is at the gate. He is near at the gate, to accord with the view that Mark 14:26 and 27 speaks of some kind of parousia. But the author says the comparison with the fig tree and summer requires that the impersonal, it is near. So this is again the problem of translation. Is preferred to that, so it need not be a reference to the end. The fourth point is the text that resist the retrieval from the earth. Now, these are again to be noted. The heaven and earth will pass away in Mark 13:37, though interpreted figuratively by most scholars, need to be seen more than just a figure of speech used to illustrate the permanence of his words. Rather, it can be seen as the beginning of Jesus' response to the first half of the disciples' question in Mark 13:4. Now, he goes into the intricacies of this, interpreting that. In Mark's narrative, it is not so much the end that is inevitable and imminent, as those ends we encounter on the road to discipleship and testing. That is why the question, when the end is not the end, that he is just trying to show that. It is not the parousia that dominated Mark and eschatology, according to the author, as much as the appearances of the returning Lord 3 times leading up to midnight. So that is these are the signs of the end, actually, according to the author. The last section deals with the 2 Peter and Stoicism and the cosmic conflagration, where it talks about the end cycle or spiral. The passing away of the world mentioned in Mark 13:31 is developed further in other traditions of scripture. The passing away of heaven and earth is linked explicitly with the new heaven and earth in Revelation 21:1. Dyers argue that even here the language is not necessarily to be taken as referring to the annihilation of earth and its replacement by a totally new creation. The closest analogy to the imposition of the solar system or the modern nuclear holocaust was the Stoic idea of cosmic conflagration. Now, this is an interesting point actually to be noted. That means Stoics believe that in the end, the earth will melt and so on. And so there will be a cataclysmic end for the cosmos, which is actually considered as a spiraling event with each cosmic cycle beginning and ending with fire. This is actually a Stoic idea. So the second language is actually echoing the Stoic thought. In other words, the Christian eschatology is actually put it in the using these terms and terminologies taken from the Stoics. That is the burning up of earth and heavens in 2 Peter. And here, 2 Peter seems to use the language and concepts shaped specifically to appeal to the Greek cultural world, according to the one scholar Neil. The contextualization of eschatological exhortations of 2 Peter presents insurmountable problems for a retrieval of the text from the perspective of the earth. Now, this is admitted by the author. This is even so if the texts are understood in terms of renewal rather than annihilation of the earth. So he understands these texts that talk about the burning of the earth in fire as the renewal of the earth for something new, since they also exhort the hearer to actively desiring, if not hastening, that day. Texts that at the most maintain the prerogative of the creator to decreate or recreate the creation, here have become texts that encourage our eager expectation of and even participation in that process. So the process of recontextualization of text as a living word requires a sensitivity to wider shifts in meaning and cosmologies. Now, this is a point actually that is derived from these interpretations. A point actually that is helpful in hermeneutics. And an attention to the history of interpretation of text which spans pre-modern, modern, and postmodern eras. That's what he argues. So in conclusion, he says, an end, not the end. What then is the fate of the earth in Mark 13? Many texts in Mark indicate dimensions positive to earth in the wider Mark and story. Jesus was with the wild beasts. We have already seen in the other texts. And also Jesus proclaims the Sea of Galilee as a bridge for disciples to cross over cultures, rather than a fearful chasm. Galilee as a place is integral to mission and encounter with the resurrected Jesus. Some texts in Mark have been retrieved from the brink of the apocalyptic abyss and interpreted in the light of an interconnected cosmos where human activity and cosmic consequences cannot be separated, and the earth has intrinsic purpose together with humanity. One text still remains that affirms the exclusive knowledge of the Father regarding the ultimate fate of heaven and earth, that is Mark 13, 31, 32. The text seems to assume rather than assert the transcendence of the Creator. Whether this text necessarily speaks of the annihilation is doubtful. Its function within the creative narrative of Mark is to trigger a call to be on alert for ends as we encounter them in all aspects of the human existence. 2 Peter 3, which desires the hastening and earnest desire of the torching and dissolving of the heavens and fiery melting of the elements, present irretrievable problems for an ethical response to ecological problems. Again, the hope is for a renewed heaven and earth. That's the stress. But the active encouragement is to hasten the demise of the earth is actually is an invitation more popular among many Christians. And the author argues against that. All right, now I invite your questions. We have some 8 minutes left. And if you want to spend some 5 or 10 minutes more, I don't mind. Also, yeah, please. No problem. You can raise any questions. If you don't understand, also you can ask. No problem. Because as I mentioned, this article is not so easy to digest. Yes, Satyanandan again. Yeah, Satyanandan. Yes.
Hello.
Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, sir. In an ecological perspective, the ecology has given us a hope for humanity.
Yes.
At the same time, is any chance to eschatology gives us a hope for entire humanity?
If I understand your question, is eschatology giving any hope for humanity?
Yeah.
Yeah, precisely. Eschatology, see, when we study eschatology, the proper understanding of eschatology, even if it is apocalyptic eschatology, is that it gives us hope.
Yeah.
That, things will change. And the present persecution, present suffering, see, apocalyptic eschatology emerges from the context of persecution, suffering, death, and foreign domination. No, that is the context. That happened even before Jesus came also, during the intertestamental time, after many centuries of foreign domination. So as the intertestamental literature points out. So eschatology is oriented to the present, but the popular understanding is that eschatology is oriented to the future, but it is actually giving us hope and strength to confront the issues of the present more courageously, more faithfully, So that is the in general. Now, with regard to the Earth also, with regard to the planet Earth is also the same thing, and the universe also. But the author actually in this article is trying to grapple with this, that see, it is misunderstood many times. These apocalyptic texts, eschatological texts that dealing with the Earth, Sun, and the Moon and the universe are all considered as speaking against ecological concerns, because the six biblicist eschatological principles laid out here, that reflects the popular understanding, as you clearly said. Yes, but that is not the intention of the biblical text. That is what the author argues.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yes, other questions? Yeah. Others, please raise your questions, no problem. Usually what happens is that in the ecological reading, we only take text that suits us. Text that whether when the text talk about the water, the land, earth, and all those, in positive terms, it's easy to do an ecological reading following the eco-justice principles. But how to read a text when the text is actually speaking, when the text appears to speak against the ecological, some of the ecological concerns like preservation of the earth and the welfare of the earth and its components. In the popular understanding, when it is speaks against, how do we do an ecological reading? That is the challenge. That's why I said it's a very interesting article, a very challenging article, very thought-provoking. Of course, one needs to read not once, at least 2-3 times you have to read. Then only you will be able to come to grips with what the author is trying to say. But what I find more interesting is that see how our worldview is influencing our interpretation. Even Stephen Hawking. I still remember the statement of that great physicist, astrophysicist Stephen Hawking, who made the statement that does someone remember a statement, a very interesting statement with regard to the Earth he made? Is anybody interested in science? Here, remember that statement. I think all those who do the ecological reading he is actually a scientist, an astrophysicist, maybe one of the foremost in our times, in our age. So, of course, he's gone. He's no more. But still, his influence is so great. Nobody remembers that. Anybody? What he said about the planet Earth. Again, echoing the same thing. That he said this planet Earth has gone beyond redemption. It has become polluted. We cannot survive on this planet Earth for many years. So what he suggested? He said we should migrate to some other place, some other planet. That's what he said. That is his advice, actually. In fact, in one of my sermons, I preached against this maybe some 10 or 15 years ago, when the article came. That of course, not much of ecological reading I did before that, but even then, that statement was against the biblical understanding. Of course, he is not a believer in God. That's another factor, anyhow. Yeah, so that is a secular. See, he's a secular person. Completely, he's actually an agnostic. He doesn't even care whether God exists or not. He himself said, actually, this planet has gone too bad. I mean, we have corrupted it, we have polluted it too much that survival is not possible for long. So let's abandon this. Let us not try to save it. Let us not try to have ecological concerns and environmental concerns and then somehow save this planet Earth from the disaster. I think this article is also speaking against such views. Yes, other questions?
Sir, the text is new to the participants. So they are get accustomed with the text. So quite new to them. So most of them are reluctant to ask questions because first time they are hearing such an interpretation. So we cannot expect much questions at this moment. Next time they may ask.
All right. Yeah, correct. Yeah. I think, but it is important to note down some of those important.
Then they are tomorrow, next day onwards, they will be writing the assignment. More questions will come to their mind. So in the next class, they may ask questions after the completing this entire course. They will get an idea regarding the concepts only. Then they will ask later. So in the earlier classes also, the participants are reluctant to ask questions. 1 or 2 questions will come.
Yeah. That is very true. I understand that. But my suggestion is, see, when we begin to ask questions, we try to understand. That is the beginning of understanding. Because
but this is sir, this is a new approach. Nobody studied about this so far. Nobody read about this so far. So they are reluctant to ask questions.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So I am encouraging you to ask questions actually, though reluctant. But the point is that, see, this is challenging, questioning the popular understanding of our Christian theology, popular Christian theology that is preached, that you and I preach every time. When the text speaks about the falls, the stars falling from heaven, or the sun and the moon getting darkened and everything is going to be destroyed, God is going to put an end to everything. And so then what are we to do? Are we to do just to retire and then stay inactive, do nothing, or things like that? So when the author is speaking, we should try to understand what are actually on what basis he's saying. Is there any substance to what is he saying? So it's a struggle to understand, especially these what we call, these are actually counter texts. These are actually difficult texts that the ecological reader, a person interested in ecological reading, will have to face. So as the first reading, which is more plain, I would say that's a plain ecological reading, very straightforward. Jesus goes to the wilderness, the river, the water, the land, then those things we can interpret so easily. But that's what the author calls it, counter text. I mean, terror text. These are texts of terror. Text we don't understand. That's a challenge. All right, yeah.